Let's bring in someone who's been on the programme before, senior Europe correspondent at the South China Morning Post, Finbar Birmingham. Finbar, good to have you with us. Let's start with the focus on Ukraine. There was some reporting, some rumour today that President Xi has a sort of embryonic plan for some peace talks with regards to Ukraine, which is interesting because, as we were discussing last night, it feels as if the Europeans have gone past that point.
Yes, Christian, I would say you're probably right. I mean, I think I saw the same rumours that you did on social media. It hasn't been substantiated, and frankly, I'd be quite surprised looking at the rhetoric that came out of this trip. They do seem as far apart as ever. Both sides say they want to bring peace to Ukraine, but they're very different. They have very different point of views in how they would do that. Xi Jinping, he reiterated his point in Paris that the legitimate security concerns of all parties in the conflict would have to be respected. And that's anathema both to the Ukrainians and the Europeans, who see Russia as the aggressor in this war. They don't see the security concerns of the Russians as being legitimate. So as I don't have any intel on that specific point, it seems to jar with the reality of what we've seen in the diplomacy leading up to this. I mean, Chinese diplomats have been traveling to Europe for months now, and they've been pushing for example, in order to attend peace talks in Switzerland, they told EU officials that they wanted the West to stop shipping weapons to Ukraine. That's not going to happen. I mean, we see an influx of it, an increase in that. So I would hasten to say that I might be wrong, but those rumours seem quite far-fetched.
But that said, President Macron has welcomed today a Chinese commitment, in inverted commas, to abstain from selling weapons to Russia and to closely control the export of dual-usage equipment. I mean, there's a big difference between a commitment and actually following through on it. But I just wonder if that does reflect a cooling of the relationship between Beijing and Moscow, which has also been discussed.
I don't think so. Vladimir Putin's going to China next week. I don't necessarily see that much of a cooling in the relationship. Macron did say that he had a commitment from Xi Jinping, but I think he also said that last year when he went to Beijing in April. The proof will be in the pudding, particularly on the dual-use goods. The Europeans notice a dramatic increase in the intensity in which China is shipping things like circuit boards and microchips and surveillance equipment and satellite imagery, these sorts of dual-use items that they say are rocking up on the battlefield in Ukraine and killing Ukrainians. So the proof will be in the pudding. I mean, one thing we did see come out of this meeting was that the Chinese supported the French push to have an Olympic truce, which would be a ceasefire in all global conflicts during the Paris Games in July and August, which sounds great, of course. But again, I don't think the Russians or, many parties at conflict would pay heed to the timing of the Olympics in terms of when they're going to have a ceasefire.
Trade was a big part of the discussion today. We know that the European Commission is wrapping up its anti-subsidy investigation into Chinese electric cars. But what the Chinese are very good at is divide and rule. I don't think the Germans are particularly keen on this investigation because, of course, they have a very close relationship with the Chinese when it comes to cars. Not so the French.
It's true. The Germans and the French are quite far apart on how they see this. The French they were the ones who sponsored the Commission's investigation on an unofficial basis. What we saw this week was the French double game in motion. They want to see anti-subsidy duties put on the import of Chinese cars coming to Europe, but they also want the Chinese to set up electric vehicle factories in France. This is quite clear. They said this on the record. This is what they want. The Germans don't like any of this. So we do see that Europe's two major powers are sort of pulling in opposite directions, whereas the French really love the tougher trade stance that Brussels has taken. The French diplomats here in Brussels, they joke that Brussels itself is becoming more French, whereas it's anathema to the Germans who, as you say, are far more exposed to the Chinese economy.
There's a couple of other stories I want to touch on outside of France today. Of course, the story here in the UK that China is thought to be behind a hack of the UK Ministry of Defence's payroll, which is embarrassing for the MOD, but of great concern not just to the UK. There are other European governments who have these concerns as well.
Yeah, it's part of a trend, I would say. I mean, in the last month, we've seen a real ratcheting up in these cases of alleged espionage on the part of the Chinese intelligence services. Just this morning in Brussels, in fact, the far right, the German far right, the AfD's lead candidate in the European elections, he's an MP called Maximilian Krah. His office in the European Parliament was raided by German and Belgian police investigating his assistant for spying for China. We saw 4 German nationals, including Krah's assistant, arrested last month for the same charges. And of course, you recall that I'm sure you've covered on the show, the MPs in the UK who've had their phones hacked by China. We saw the head of the Belgian Foreign Affairs Committee have the same problem. The former Belgian Prime Minister, Guy Verhofstadt, says his phone was hacked by Chinese intelligence services. So there's a big uptick in this. I don't know what the Western authorities are going to do about it, because it seems to be a bit of a problem.